Macbeth plot summary. Act 1. The play begins with rolls of thunder and flashes of lightning. 3 witches named the Weird Sisters agree to meet with the Scottish noble Macbeth after a battle. They then chant an ominous spell, fair is foul and foul is fair, which foreshadows the corruption which will follow. Before Macbeth is introduced, the Scottish king Duncan meets with a soldier who has fought alongside Macbeth defending Scotland from their enemies, both a rebel army led by MacDonald and an invading force from Norway led by King Sweno. The soldier praises the bravery of the captains, Macbeth and Banquo, who have delivered victory for the king. Duncan decides to reward Macbeth, giving him the title of Thane of Cawdor. The witches reappear on the heath, awaiting Macbeth. He arrives with his friend and fellow Thane Banquo. They greet the witches, who swiftly hail Macbeth by his current title, Thane of Glamis, before predicting he shall be Thane of Cawdor, and finally that he shall be king hereafter. Banquo then interrupts and asks for the sisters to speak to him. They then predict that Banquo's sons will be kings, though he himself will not. The witches vanish. Ross and Angus then arrive with news that Macbeth has been rewarded with the title Thane of Cawdor, confirming a part of the Weird Sisters' prophecy. Macbeth seems confused, but is also tempted by the prospect of becoming king. Macbeth and Banquo go to Duncan, who praises both of them for their bravery in the battle. Duncan then announces that, in the event of his death, the crown will pass to his eldest son Malcolm, whom he names Prince of Cumberland. The king then states that they will all travel to Inverness Castle, Macbeth's home, to celebrate together. At Inverness, Lady Macbeth enters, reading a letter from Macbeth which recounts his meeting with the witches. She is delighted by the possibility that Macbeth may become king, but also expresses doubts he is ruthless enough to kill Duncan. Lady Macbeth calls upon the spirits of darkness for the power to manipulate her husband. Macbeth arrives, and the pair discuss the possibility of him becoming king. Soon after, Duncan arrives at the castle. Whilst the evening celebration is in full swing, Macbeth reasons that it is too risky to attempt to murder Duncan, and decides his ambition has overreached itself. He then tells this to Lady Macbeth, who furiously taunts him, telling him he is a coward and not a man. She then reveals the plan of how they will drug the servants and smear their bodies with the blood of the king to frame them. Macbeth praises her strength and intelligence and agrees to go through with the plan. Act 2. At the end of the evening, Macbeth and Banquo meet. Banquo asks Macbeth about the witches' prophecies, and Macbeth claims he hasn't thought about them. Banquo exits, and Macbeth sees a vision of a bloody dagger, which seems to be pointing him in the direction of Duncan's bedchamber. After questioning the strange apparition, he hears the bell which indicates Lady Macbeth has drugged the guards, and he leaves to murder Duncan. After the king is murdered, Macbeth is traumatized, and returns to Lady Macbeth covered in blood and rambling about strange voices in his head, saying he will sleep no more. Lady Macbeth takes charge and commands him to wash the blood from his hands, as she returns to smear Duncan's guards with blood and plant the daggers at the scene. As the pair exit, a drunken porter enters and complains about a loud knocking at the door, which he imagines to be 3 sinners waiting to enter the gates of hell. He then opens the gate to let in Lennox and Macduff. Macbeth re-enters, having cleaned himself from the blood of the king, and directs Macduff to Duncan's bedchamber to wake him. A few moments later, Macduff returns and yells for the others to awake, since Duncan has been murdered. Macbeth plays the perfect deceiver, claiming that the king's death renders life pointless, before he admits to having killed the guards in a blinding rage once he discovered their supposed guilt. Lady Macbeth faints and is carried off the stage. The Thanes exit, and the king's sons Malcolm and Donalbain agree to flee to Ireland and England respectively, as they both fear for their lives. Act 3. Macbeth has been crowned king. At the castle in Forres, Banquo, alone, voices his suspicions that Macbeth is responsible for Duncan's murder, whilst also eagerly thinking that his own sons might be kings. Macbeth enters and asks Banquo to attend a feast in the evening. Banquo agrees to return after taking his son Fleance riding. After they exit, Macbeth rages at the prospect of Banquo's sons inheriting his throne, and he summons 2 murderers and instructs them to kill Banquo and Fleance. Before the feast, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth meet, with Macbeth fitfully declaring that they are not safe until all threats to their position are dealt with. Lady Macbeth questions his intentions, but Macbeth, in a sign that the power is shifting in their relationship, only hints at what he is planning, stating that she should remain innocent. Banquo and Fleance are set upon by 3 murderers. Banquo is killed, but Fleance escapes as Banquo urges him to avenge his death. As Macbeth greets his guests for the banquet, a murderer arrives with the news that Banquo is dead and Fleance has escaped. Macbeth is furious, but returns to entertain his guests. As he arrives at the table, he finds the bloody ghost of Banquo in his seat and wails in horror before the other guests, who cannot see the apparition. The ghost vanishes, and Lady Macbeth attempts to calm her husband, but it soon reappears, triggering more unhinged shouting from Macbeth. Lady Macbeth urges the guests to leave. Macbeth then decides he will return to the Weird Sisters to find out more about his fate. Lennox meets with another lord to discuss the state of the kingdom. It is revealed that Banquo's murder has been blamed on Fleance. However, both men are highly suspicious of Macbeth. The lord states that Macduff has left Scotland to join up with Malcolm in England. Act 4. The witches gather in a cavern and cast a spell about a cauldron which boils and bubbles. Macbeth enters, and the witches summon 3 ghostly apparitions which deliver messages to Macbeth. The first is an armoured head, which warns Macbeth to beware Macduff, the Thane of Fife. The second apparition is a bloody child, which encourages Macbeth, stating that none of woman born shall harm him. Despite this, Macbeth states he will have Macduff murdered nonetheless. The third apparition is a crowned child holding a tree. It tells Macbeth that he will never be defeated until Great Birnam Wood to High Dunsinane Hill shall come against him. Macbeth then asks if Banquo's sons will ever rule in Scotland. He is shown a vision of 8 kings followed by Banquo, suggesting that Banquo's sons will indeed become kings, thwarting Macbeth's ambitions. The witches disappear, and Lennox arrives with news that Macduff has fled to England. Macbeth then vows out of earshot to kill all of Macduff's family. At Macduff's castle in Fife, Lady Macduff and her son are murdered by Macbeth's men. In England, Macduff meets with Malcolm. The pair discuss the terrible state of Scotland under Macbeth's rule. Malcolm is suspicious of Macduff and tests his loyalty by lying about his own horrible sins. Macduff is dismayed by Malcolm's claims and passes the test. They decide to invade Scotland with the aid of 10,000 men from England. Then, Ross arrives to tell Macduff that his wife and children are dead. Malcolm assures a desperate Macduff that revenge will cure his grief. Act 5. At Macbeth's castle in Dunsinane, a doctor and gentlewoman watch as Lady Macbeth sleepwalks. In a clear sign of her guilty conscience, Lady Macbeth attempts to wash an imagined spot of blood off her hands, whilst recalling the murders of Macduff's family and Banquo. Malcolm's troops are gathering near to Dunsinane, and Macbeth prepares the castle for battle, seemingly confident in his victory because of the witch's prophecies. Malcolm orders his troops to cut down branches from nearby Birnam Wood to shield their numbers from Macbeth's men as they march to the castle. Returning to Dunsinane Castle, a cry is heard from within the walls, and Macbeth's servant, Seaton, arrives to inform Macbeth that Lady Macbeth is dead. Macbeth then utters his final soliloquy to the audience, where he laments that life is just a meaningless passage of time and signifies nothing. A messenger arrives and informs Macbeth that Birnam Wood is advancing on the castle. As the battle commences, Macbeth again seems confident in his safety, repeating the prophecy that none of woman born shall harm him. Macbeth is challenged by the brave son of the English lord Siward. They fight, and Macbeth kills him. In the heat of the battle, Macduff and Macbeth finally meet. Macbeth continues to persevere with confidence in the witch's prophecy, but Macduff suddenly reveals that he was born by caesarean section, cut from his mother's womb. thus confirming that the witches have deceived Macbeth. Macbeth continues to fight on, despite his broken faith in the witches, but Macduff bests him, and he is slain. Macduff then delivers the head of the tyrant Macbeth to Malcolm, whom Macduff hails as king. Malcolm makes a speech before the other thanes, honouring and rewarding those who fought for him. Malcolm's words identify his intentions to glorify Scotland and not himself, which portrays him as a noble king, in stark contrast to Macbeth. In the final words, he invites them all to see him crowned as king at Scone. The end.